Don't have a Hilternship?
Not working 80 hours a week and feeling guilty?
Feeling like the world's going to end because of a few bad grades?
Don't have your entire life figured out?
Neither do we, and we're seniors. Hi, I'm Jenny.
And I'm Dhanya. In this podcast series, we'll be talking about all these questions we asked and more to understand why AU is the way that it is and if there's anything that we, as in you and us, can do about it.
This podcast is a 3-part series released by AU's Center for Diversity and Inclusion, or CDI. Today, we'll be sitting down with Wyatt Foster, a peer health educator at AU's Health Promotion and Advocacy Center, or HPAC, to talk about self-care as a way to resist grind culture.
So we encourage you to put away whatever you're working on, relax, even take a walk as you tune in.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Wyatt. We're just going to start with you introducing yourself, so describing any sort of important affiliations you have, and also describing your role as a with HPAC as a peer health educator.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so my name's Wyatt. I'm a senior majoring in SAS. I am, yes, a peer health educator with the Health Promotion Advocacy Center. I'm also an intern for the Office of Advocacy Services for Interpersonal and Sexual Violence, better known as OASIS. Yeah, and so as a peer health educator, so this is my second year doing it. So I've done it post, well, not post, but post and pre-COVID, if you will. So traditionally, the idea is that it's like a year-long thing. So in the first semester, you do a 2-hour class every week. And the second semester, you do an hour-long class every week. And we cover like a really wide variety of wellness topics. So from like mental health, physical health, things about consent training, because we help to lead the Empower AU, the mandatory consent training at AU. We learned about like stalking the other week. We learned about like financial wellness, all kinds of stuff, lots of stuff around self-care. So wide variety of topics. And then we normally, if we were in person, would kind of be tasked with going onto campus and educating our peers, if you will. So that could be like tabling at a basketball game. We've done kind of like sex trivia, Jeopardy stuff. In the dorms, we've partnered with like other organizations to help lead workshops. We, like I said, lead Empower AU. We also used to lead the Step Up bystander intervention. So all that kind of stuff, just being like a resource on campus for our peers. Yeah.
Awesome. I love to hear that HPAC does so much intersectional stuff. Like I was so thrilled to hear you talking about like financial wellness as well as mental wellness. Like that's so awesome and speaks to just how multidimensional wellness is for all of us in our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for our next question, I wanted to ask if you could talk about how HPAC has served or helped AU students in confronting burnout specifically.
Yeah, for sure. So this year, so HPAC is normally, there's usually 4 staff members within HPAC, 2 of which this year got some different amazing jobs elsewhere. So we're in the midst of they're like rehiring some people for HPAC, but normally we have one person who's very like dedicated to self-care, doing like workshops and trainings and stuff like that, through like events on campus or webinar kind of stuff. And then you also, I'm not 100% sure if they're doing it at this moment because she left, but traditionally you're able to kind of like book a self-care appointment basically with someone from HPAC. I know that Mickey, the director of HPAC, still does those kind of like one-on-one appointments to talk about like bettering your sleep schedule and stuff like that. So there is like the one-on-one option. And then also usually when we're in like full programming mode, workshops or like events done to talk about self-care, which kind of is within the context of burnout culture, because that's definitely, I think, something a lot of AU students can relate to. So definitely important to talk about.
Yeah, so in our 2 previous episodes, we focused a lot on like describing grind culture at AU. So I definitely, obviously, the consequence of that is feeling so burnt out. So, I think it's always interesting to learn about what resources AU provides for that, because it's definitely, I think, a mixed bag. Um, But as our next question, we wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the commodification of self care and what you think the negative effects of that are.
Yeah, so I am so happy you asked that because I've been thinking a lot about it recently. I was watching YouTube the other day and there was, I don't even remember like what brand or product it was, but it was like self-care your way or something. And so I think a lot of times once things get into the mainstream, like you said, it gets commodified, like under the system of consumerism and capitalism, that just is what tends to happen. And I think the issue with that when it comes to self-care is this idea that like if you buy this one product or you do this one thing, then all of a sudden everything in your life is like gonna be okay. And I think we kind of need to reframe how we think of self-care. Because while self-care is something you should definitely like enjoy doing, it also can be hard. Like sometimes self-care can be going to therapy or something. And while that is like a form of bettering yourself and it's definitely super beneficial, it also can be difficult. And so I think simplifying self-care down to just like doing a face mask once a week, while that can definitely be a form of self-care in like the broad scheme of things, when it's like simplified down to one product, it can be pretty problematic, especially just within, I think, systems of capitalism and consumerism is very based in like, I mean, maybe this is getting a bit broad, but like based in system of oppression and like whiteness. And it's just not something that works for everyone. And I think we see the damage of, I know like I had to delete TikTok, right? Because it was like the whole like TikTok made me buy it kind of thing. And I think a lot of that had to do with things that were framed as being for self-care. When self-care is definitely more of an internal thing, and is very like personal to whoever is practicing it for themselves. And so assuming that one product is going to work for everyone, or you have to spend money on something in order to practice self-care, I think has a lot of issues with it. And I'm just like, it's just frustrating to see how literally everything gets turned into a commodity, within the systems that we live in.
For sure. And I think Jenny and I were having this conversation earlier too, how like we often shame folks for how they practice self-care too if it's not rooted in commodity and commercialism. So like I don't know if you have a self-care practice that works for you that is not like conventionally seen as like the face mask or like the manicure or something like that. It's like looked down upon. So with
Yeah.
that, I wanted to ask if you had any advice to give to our listeners on how to integrate these more holistic self-care practices into their daily lives.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's such a good point. Like self-care, it looks different for every single person because we all enjoy different things. And I think a central point of self-care is that it's something that brings you joy, or at the very least, like gives you a bit of a break from the day-to-day grind so you don't get those feelings of burnout. So I would say there are like a few different, like pretty tangible steps that you could take if you're just looking to put it in your routine. I would say the first thing would be just to like think about or even write down a list of like things that you genuinely enjoy or that bring you joy. And that doesn't have to just be things that you do every day. Like that could be things that you enjoy having in your space. Like maybe you like a certain color, or you like having plants or having candles or whatever it might be. Or it could be, I enjoy working out or I enjoy going to therapy. Like it can be bigger things as well. And then kind of like once you have just a list of things that you like or you like doing, thinking about how you can more fully incorporate that into your day-to-day routine. And that can be kind of more in the background through like the aesthetic of your room or something like that, or if it is more of like a physical activity that you want to do. I think kind of in the beginning, setting small goals, because like all the research that has been done points to the fact that like if you're creating a habit, the best way to do that is to create like small tangible goals that you can actually reach, so you don't set these huge goals and then feel disappointed when you don't reach them. So I would say, let's say you really enjoy doing yoga or something, thinking about designating a time in your day or like every other day or something that you can do that, and then making it a tangible thing, like 15 minutes or whatever. So you're not like, I'm going to do yoga for 5 hours a day, you know, like nothing insane that you like can't manage, but that you can fit into your day, or fit into like 4 days a week or something. And then just kind of starting to like incorporate that in your week. So maybe try and start doing that with like a week or 2 weeks. And then after that time, kind of like go back and reevaluate, like, okay, how did that make me feel to be able to do that? Was it manageable given how much time I have to spend doing other things? Do I want to spend more time doing that? Um, so yeah, evaluate it after a little bit and then kind of like just tweak things as you go. Maybe you're like, okay, turns out I don't actually like doing yoga as much as I thought. Like it didn't do that much for me, but I'd like to get off my phone, I guess, more. So then, you know, start thinking, okay, maybe I can set 20 minutes a day where I'm not on my phone. So just kind of like, yeah, making small tangible goals for yourself and then just reevaluating and tweaking things as you go, I would say would be my best advice.
No, I think that's actually really helpful because I'm definitely the kind of person when it comes to self-care things where I just take it to an extreme and it's like if I can't do it perfectly this way, then I just can't do it at all. And so that like one other way of thinking, I think, is also like a barrier for people, at least me in particular. I know, like with working out, I'm like, well, I have to like have a full workout schedule before I even think about implementing this.
Right. It's not
So
like I'm gonna go for a 10-minute walk. Like, no, I
yeah,
need a 3 hour full body. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's really helpful. So as our final question, we wanted to just give you space if there's any sort of last thoughts that you want to share or that you think is really important for our listeners to know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there are two things. The first is something that I know I personally struggle with, which is just that, like, especially within, I mean, as you guys have talked about on your podcast, the like within the like grind culture and within a culture that tells you if you're not productive 24/7, you're not productive at all, that I think there can be a lot of like shame around self-care and like internalized guilt around taking time out of your day to do things for yourself. So even if you're like, maybe one day your form of self-care is just like watching one episode of something on Netflix and just like relaxing for a minute. I think, at least for me, I'm kind of always in the back of my head, like, okay, but what should I be doing? Like, I should be writing that paper. I should be doing this. So I think giving yourself some like patience and knowing that like it doesn't mean that you're, you know, failing at self-care because you feel guilty about it. I think that's a natural thing, to experience, given that we've been taught that we shouldn't value self-care. And I think the second thing is that I'm often reminded of the Audre Lorde quote where she says that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that's an act of political warfare. And I think that that kind of mindset about self-care, kind of shows like how rare it is for people to actually take time for themselves and to actually like value their mental health and their physical health within, again, like a system that tells you you're not supposed to. um, so yeah, be patient with yourself, be kind with yourself, know that it's a process and it's a skill that you can learn just like anything else, and you can develop it and get better at it.
So, after our conversation with Wyatt, we both thought it would be really great to expand on our own experiences with grind culture and burnout. So, this next part is just a little conversation between both me, Jenny, and Dhanya, speaking on behalf of our personal experiences. The first question that we had was, what are the ways that we have both tried to confront burnout and set boundaries? In my case, I think the ways I've tried to confront it is first realizing that it is like what I'm experiencing as we've kind of explored these episodes. I think burnout is something that doesn't get discussed, obviously. So it can be really hard to acknowledge when you're experiencing those symptoms of total exhaustion, running on empty. That's what I kind of like to describe for myself when I'm going through it. And so it's for me acknowledging when I really, really feel like there is nothing left to keep me going. And it's a frustrating experience because, you know, I can be in the middle of certain projects or assignments that I really thought I was passionate about, and figured, I can get myself through this because I really love what I do. But at the same time, feeling like there's nothing really there for me to latch onto and pull me through makes it really hard for me to finish. And it kind of becomes a cycle of, not completing things in the way I wanted to, or having to turn down things in the end because I simply don't have the energy. So, in that way, I've learned to really be firm when I set boundaries, whether that's, really thinking through a decision, saying no to certain things that um, are going to take up a little bit too much of my time or too much of a commitment, and really putting first the experiences that I feel are going to help me grow as a person, and are still tied to what I'm passionate about. Because I've gotten to a point where I know I cannot just expound energy on things that um, not necessarily won't get me anywhere, but I feel like I don't really want to make room for. Um, so that's definitely one of the main ways I've tried to confront burnout and to also set boundaries.
Yeah, I think I've followed a lot of stuff that you said, Jenny, on it's you feel like you're running on this empty tank. And for me at least, it's really hard to like before diagnose, like pre-diagnose your burnout. Like you only know that you're burnt out when you are burnt out and you're like at the empty tank. You don't really recognize it when you're at like half tank and you're like, I should probably fill up. You like, for me at least, I recognize it when I'm like empty, my engine's sputtering, So I think like I've just tried to be better about like taking stock of my own self, like Sunday before the week starts. I'm like, how am I feeling? And just like, if I'm at that medium tank, I'm like, all right, what are the things that make me whole? How can I fill up? And that's how I try and devote the start of my week, is just to find what makes me whole, do more of that to give me energy to do the other work stuff that does not come as easily. And for me, setting boundaries has always been so difficult because I lo- I think I'm just a people pleaser, like textbook people pleaser. And I just love saying yes to things. And it's just so harmful at some point when you like say yes to a bunch of stuff and people have these expectations of you and you fall short. And that hurts me when I'm like, oh, I can't do this. But then I realized that communicating your needs is like the best way to go about things always. If there's anything I've learned throughout college, it's just over communicating is always better than under communicating. I mean, like, don't tell me everything, but giving people a temperature check on where you're at just goes such a long way, rather than just like telling them at the very end, like a day before things are due or like an hour before things are due. And it's like, and yeah, just communicating your needs has helped me set boundaries and just like be more transparent with myself before like embarking on these things.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to the people pleaser thing. I'm 100% guilty of that. And I agree that it's like the main thing that makes it very hard for me to set boundaries, because at the same time, I'm also, just in past experiences, I want to be there for, other students or other colleagues. And I want to give them space because I know how it can be hard to find those things at AU. So sometimes it's not just like turning things down, but it's also like having the emotional bandwidth, so to speak, to like be there for other people. Um, and so when you were talking about that, it made me think of our following question, which is, in what ways can self care be radical? And for me, I think having grown up in a time where like you have to be well rounded as a student, it's not enough to have good grades, it's not enough to have a job, to intern, to be involved. You have to be all of these things at once and somehow have a manageable life. I've really tried to push back on that and to tell myself that like I don't need to be perfect. And when I practice self-care, it doesn't have to look perfect either. I really bought into like the idea of like really commercialized self-care, that like, oh, it really just comes down to me getting into like exercising more, or like, incorporating healthy habits, which are all obviously important, but it's for me been more of like, you know what, today I'm gonna just sleep all day, or I'm gonna watch a movie that makes me happy, or I'm going to just completely log off and kind of put aside everything. Um, and it's sort of this idea that, like, just being not productive at all, I think is for me what can make it very radical, because we live in a society where, like, you always have to be productive no matter what. So yeah, when I practice self-care now, especially, I think a lot about how I'm trying to move away from that sort of mentality, which can really be hard because you feel guilty. And then when people sort of see you not doing anything, they question that a lot and make you feel as if, you know, you are somehow inferior or less than, that you are not a good student or a good worker. Um, so yeah, I think that's a really big part of it, sort of being radical, and that especially for people of color, that we're just trying to survive a lot of the time, and it's, you know, we go to a predominantly white institution where sometimes it feels really impossible to just even be heard or seen. So yeah, I'm always just fighting against what I think is, you know, the norms. And as another question for you specifically, Danya, what do you think it means to put yourself first?
Yeah, I just the way you spoke about like guilt, Jenny, and engaging in self-care, like that hit hard so much. Like you do these things to like get away from productivity, but the guilt is like always creeping in the back of my mind. It's like it's so hard to turn away from. And to me, I think putting yourself first means fueling yourself to be there for others when they need your support. That's what it means to me at least. I think taking care of myself is how I can grow and just become a better source of support for my friends and my family and my peers. Um, Especially like doing dialogue work or peer educator work, like it can get really heavy to like sit and have these conversations or be an activist on social justice issues. I think so many times we disregard our own mental health in order to talk about movements and causes and action, but action and movements can only be sustainable when we take care of ourselves. So, putting yourself first is not selfish necessarily if you know you're doing it in service of your well-being, your friends and their well-being, the movements and ideas that you care about. And I think that's a really common misconception that we just have to dismantle, this idea that putting yourself first is not necessarily selfish. And I think that brings us to just our final idea of who do you think you would be or where would you be without self-doubt?
Yeah, that's a really, I think, strong question. For me now, once again, being at the end of our 4 years at AU, I have seen how often my self-doubt has really stopped me from going out of my way to try new things or to just simply ask for help. I know that that's also something that, when it comes to like burnout, has been a significant problem for me, is sort of suffering in silence. That's a big thing for me that I like. It's become very hard for me to separate it from who I am. So I think that where I would be without that self doubt would be, you know, I don't want to say healthier place, but, you know, certainly a place where I think I feel more comfortable asking for help, um, and not suffering in silence. And I think that that could make all the difference, knowing that, you know, there's nothing wrong with, you know, whether it comes down to asking a professor for an extension or going beyond and, you know, seeking professional help for mental illness, like you were saying. Um, the self doubt that I have experienced is so directly tied to that desire to be more independent. Um, and certainly something frustrating, um, because once again, I think that's pretty prevalent for lots of marginalized students, wanting to be pretty independent, whether for, cultural reasons or because, kind of what was discussed in one of the previous episodes about imposter syndrome, which we know now is not, really correct terminology, but it's really this sense of wanting to prove yourself because you kind of have to. Otherwise, people are, never going to believe that you are somehow um, worthy of the place that you're in. So, yeah, I really want to believe that without self doubt, I would not be so hesitant, right, to take on new experiences. Um, and so, yeah, I think, for everyone listening, I want to also encourage that, and to really question where your self doubt is coming from, um, and what we can do to sort of mitigate that.
Yeah, so much of that is exactly how I feel going through getting ready to graduate and thinking on like freshman year me and how scared I was to just like speak in class when so many of my peers would just like piggyback off of each other. I hate when people say that. um and I don't know, it's very frustrating for me at least to think back to where I was, but it's also pretty gratifying to see where I am now and the confidence that I've been able to build up through building these friendships, like with you, Jenny, and with other members of staff at CDI, or even just like people who are like minded in questioning these issues of justice. And I think this language of imposter syndrome, going back to Professor Noemi's episode, like, I think it's useful to think about where we would be without self doubt, of course, but the systems that we are under perpetuate our self-doubt. Like it's not just our own doing that we feel less than or insignificant. Like it's the systems and institutions that we're under that make it so that we feel these things and continue to feel these things. So going through this like personal introspection is really great, but it's like hard to do that when you know that there are things that are larger than the individual that are perpetuating and making it so that these things continue to happen. And I don't know, it makes me thankful that we've taken the space to really talk about burnout and like given it its time, because like Nia said in the first episode, everyone wants to talk about burnout when it's not themselves, and this has been pretty hard. Like this section of just you and me, Jenny, it's like it's pushed me a lot, and I just keep thinking about what Nia said, and I was like, yeah, that is so true. And I was like, I'm telling you all about my very personal experiences with burnout and like feeling insignificant. I think just like continuing these conversations is just so important, and I hope that we've piqued your curiosity in these things. And I think a goal that Jenny and I set for ourselves as graduating seniors is that we wanted younger listeners, or even just a year younger than us, to like have these tools in their arsenal to go about countering this at AU. And I know that we both could have benefited from it.
So I really do want to thank everyone for listening. And I'm just going to end this episode with a quote by the great Audre Lorde. It goes like this: "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare."
And there you have it, our own experiences with burnout and what it means to put ourselves first.
We want to thank Wyatt for sharing her thoughts and for HPAC for putting in the work. We hope you've learned something or recognize that it's not just you going through it.
Thank you so much for listening to our 3-part podcast series about grind culture and burnout. We hope you feel empowered to continue the process of unlearning grind culture. This is Dhanya.
And this is Jenny, signing off from CDI Peer Educator Radio for today.